A question I'm often asked is, how do we scale out our logic apps? So the scenario might be, you've created a few logic apps, you're early in your journey, now you've got more workloads want to go on the same platform. How do I scale this up? Well, you've got a few main options, and I'm going to run through those and then we'll talk a bit about which one is going to be best for you. So generally, scale comes in three forms. You've got vertical scale, as in, I'm going to put this on a more powerful computer. And then you've got horizontal scale, which is, how can I add more computers to share that work across? So vertical is quite simple really, that on a Logic Apps hosting plan, you've got 3 tiers, of which you've got 1 CPU and 1 gig of RAM, 2 CPUs, 2 gig of RAM, 4 CPUs, 4 gig of RAM. So you've got 3 different hosting plans, and really that's going to be driven by a lot of memory requirements, and it's going to be driven to a certain extent by CPU as well. So we can measure the workload and see whether vertical scaling is appropriate. But then you've got 2 different ways of horizontally scaling. So you can scale out the number of instances. So a Logic Apps hosting plan is a bit like a virtual web farm, because ultimately a Logic App is like a page in a website, or it's like a website on a web server. And so when you've got a hosting plan, that will scale horizontally, either automatically, or you can set the number of instances you want between a maximum and a minimum value. So again, you can say, I'm going to put all my Logic Apps on one hosting plan and let the instances scale out. And that's not a bad strategy, and certainly that's probably your first strategy to go to. So as you go from a very small number and you add more, just put them on the same hosting plan, allow it to scale, see what happens, measure the usage. And then if you find that you're still hitting memory constraints, you might then find you want to scale up vertically. If you find that you've got issues with different workloads clashing, then we can move on to the other strategy, which is the other horizontal strategy is splitting it across multiple hosting plans. So you can put some Logic Apps on one hosting plan, some on another, some on another, and so on. Now there's a few things here that just worth bearing in mind. That a Logic App hosting plan will scale up and scale down automatically, but you've generally got a minimum of 1 instance. So again, the smallest instance, and one of them is the smallest cost you'll bear, which is around about £150 a month. So again, if you go to a bigger vertical scale, 1 instance might be £600 a month. So just bear that in mind. Similarly, if you've got 2 hosting plans, then you've got 2 times 150 or 2 times 600. So your minimum burn rate goes up as you start to scale out. But there are advantages, because first of all, you get the noisy neighbor effect, that if you've got some Logic Apps that are really, really demanding, other things that run on the same hosting plan, in other words, run on the same virtual servers, they might get affected. They might not have enough resources left for them. So you might find that some workloads that are really critical in terms of their responsiveness, you might want to isolate onto its own infrastructure. And that might be slightly underutilized, but you want to protect that because that's the ones that have got to respond quickly. You know, if there's a website ordering page that you want to submit that, the customer's waiting, and then they'll get an acknowledgement, you want that to be fast, so you want to protect that work. So you might isolate that onto its own plan, just so you know that when it's needed, it's got resources. Similarly, there might be other bits of work that doesn't matter how long they take, but you just want to get through that work as efficiently as possible. You might put all those onto another plan and just let that work at full capacity and churn through the work in its own time. So there aren't any particular do's and don'ts. It's going to depend on your workload, and you need to measure how your workloads behave for you. But generally, what I'd do first is just allow things to scale horizontally, then segregate critical workloads onto their own hosting plan, put the other ones on another hosting plan, maybe as a first thing, and then if you're still getting memory or CPU constraints, then look at scaling vertically. No absolute right and wrong answer, but just some general guidelines of the way you might go about it.